My name is Wayne Bena, W-A-Y-N-E-B-E-N-A. I serve as Deputy Secretary of State of Elections here on behalf of Secretary of State Bob Ebden, and thank you for having this hearing. I know we're kind of running up against time limits. I do have statements, but I would just want to hear from the committee. Would you rather ask questions than hear from me right off the bat? And wanted to put that option out there.
Are there any questions for Deputy Bena? See no question. Maybe just give a brief overview, if you would.
Let me start out by saying I'll skip the appetizers, I'll skip the entree and go right to dessert. Nebraska's elections are safe, reliable, accurate, and secure. Period. Hard stop. And over the last 4 years, I've come to you on many different levels, many different hearings, your questions from your constituents that all go to how we have made Nebraska's elections the gold standard throughout the country. In 2018, we worried with foreign interference with elections, and I can go into all the things that we did to secure our elections and continue to still do. In 2020, COVID had to adjust the way that we conduct elections, and let me push back, no restrictions were eased in regards to any election procedures. Our election procedures allowed us to be adaptable to more early voting happening at the polling site than at the polling site. Only 2 laws had to be adjusted during the COVID era, one to allow poll workers across county lines to be able to help out another county, and one that allowed early voting and registration in the offices to be shut down, so the county offices could be shut down to protect the public. And those are the only 2 laws, and the only used in the primary, that had to be changed for Nebraskans to have to run their elections. And in that election, the most ballots cast in the history of our state in a primary election happened. So I'm very proud of what our county elections officials did in there. We were rewarded with the census being late for the first time in the history of our country, and had to figure out in 2021 how to do redistricting so the 2022 primary could happen. People are surprised to learn is more likely that the 22 primary would have had to been moved rather than the 2020 primary. That's how close it came through the redistricting data not being in on time to be able to do that election. We came up with a plan. There was a special session. We kept a few senators off of a mountain for a few months. That vacation got delayed, but we got it done. And with half the time, we were able to have the 22 primary. And after that, it was voter ID. And this body passed a bipartisan voter ID bill that had 0 lawsuits, and less than 80 people statewide did not bring their IDs to the polling sites. And when I say that to my election directors across the country, how did that happen? How could that possibly happen? Because it hasn't happened. It was probably the most successful implementation of voter ID in the country, and I just say it's the Nebraska way. And so our election officials have risen to each and every challenge that is presented to them in the last 7 years that I have overseen the election division for the Secretary of State's office. In regards to the security aspect of what we have done, we have installed computer intrusion detection devices not only into some key areas in the state of Nebraska, but also under our voter registration system. That computer intrusion detection device was the first time that a device has been placed on a private vendor of a voter registration system, and to make sure that our voter registration system is not prone to being intruded into. And won us a national award for election innovation, has now been replicated in 7 other states. I can say is when it comes to election security, our office has worked on 4 different projects in the last 2 years that has culminated into this. By the November election, all 93 of our counties will have their websites scanned for vulnerabilities on a regular basis by Homeland Security to make sure that there's nothing that could penetrate into the county system. All 93 counties have email addresses that are .gov email addresses, which means they can't be spoofed. Which meaning is that sometimes you can see that someone can do It could be dickclark@yahoo.com, but all of a sudden it's dick.clark@yahoo.com, and it could easily be spoofed as your address. You can't spoof a .gov address because it needs to be registered, and so no one, when you have that name, you're only going to get that name, and so you're not going to be able to spoof the email address. By the general election, all 93 of our counties are going to have .gov websites. Again, you're not going to be able to set up a fake website with misinformation. That's not, you're going to know if it doesn't have .gov, it's not the Douglas County Elections website or the Sarpy County Elections website. And finally, all 93 of our counties, and this is something that took a very long time, and we're very proud to be able to say that all 93 of our counties now have either an internal county IT department or a managed service provider that they can go to use and manage the security of their election processes. No longer is it the nephew in the basement helping to run the county internet service. They're all using a professional organization or an internal IT to manage manage any vulnerabilities and correct those vulnerabilities. And that's something that a whole lot of other states can say right now. Because of the things that we are doing, the director of CISA, you've heard about from Homeland Security, will be visiting Nebraska next month to take a tour of operations and learn from not only our state, but the 4 other states in our region to learn about what we're doing and what's in the water of why we are doing it so well. And I have a great pride in our 93 county election officials that are getting it done for their constituents and for the state. We've talked about the 3 test decks and the testing that happens before the election, the 2 mock elections before every election that tests the capability and load capacity of our election reporting website, the air gap computer process, which I'm happy to answer questions upon, and our post-election audits to make sure that what's being counted is being, and the coding in our system is being accurately represented in the votes that are counted by doing a manual count of 10% of the precincts statewide. We talked a little bit about voter ID, and I'll leave it there. I'll have a few closing comments if you would allow, but I'll stop there and answer the many questions that I've heard being saved for me, and look forward to them. So with that, I'll just pause and I'll have a few concluding statements.
Thank you. Questions for Deputy Bena? Senator Halloran.
Thank you, Wayne, for being here. It's a tough job, but somebody's got to do it. I've got a number of questions, and I won't belabor those. I might send those via an email. I know the public would like to know some of those questions answered too, but there's some new questions I have from previous testimony, and we talked about that a little bit with the air gap computers. It strikes me that that becomes kind of a central hub, particularly for Douglas County, when you have X number of voting machines and they all have to communicate to that air gap, puts on thumb drives on a disk, sent to you. I think that's kind of the chain we're talking about here. It seems like there's a lot of areas of vulnerabilities there. Previous testimony from E and S suggested that they are open to an audit of a machine, several machines possibly, to test whether or not they have vulnerability being connected to the internet. Question, is the Secretary of State okay with that?
So let's start the first part of your question and I'll go then. That's 2 different questions going to the air gap computers, and we're going to the testing. One component that wasn't really talked about in the air gap computer process is that each part of this process has a paper trail. Okay, so from each one of the counting machines, Douglas is the anomaly because they have multiple machines, but let's take it for Seward County, for example. They have 1 counting machine, okay? They can count up their ballots, and during each batch, they can print a report of what the results of that counting says. And then they take the military-grade USB, take that out, take that to the computer to compile those results. From that computer, they can print out the results. and see that this matched this. And then they pull the CD, in some it's a USB drive, out, the results out to put into an internet connected computer to upload those results not only to their own websites for everything, but to our election night reporting system that's for the state. Before they press send, they can see the results that are going to be uploaded and match that with the report coming out of the computer of what they're going to upload. And so they can see that those match before they even press send. And once they press send, they can see that on our site that theirs matches ours. And at the end of the night, before we even let them go home, they have to verify their final report with what they see, what we see on the computer on the final. And again, let me reiterate, all of these results are unofficial. Everything is unofficial because after the fact, we are canvassing the vote, we are doing the manual audit before we certify to say that these are the actual results. So there are many steps in the process and checks and balances to make sure that what's going on through this process matches up to everything that's going on paper. And then ultimately, backing one up, all of our ballots are paper, they're kept, and they're manually audited after the election. The second part is in regards to the forensics audit.
Can I interrupt you just a second?
Yep, go
They're
ahead.
all manually audited?
What's that? So what had been done in the past was a random draw of 2 to 3% of the precincts statewide. So that meant not all counties would get a precinct. In listening to testimony and comments made by this body and others, the secretary expanded that in the 2022 general election to 10%. And when we did that, I asked for two things. One, every county had to have at least one precinct audited. So every county had data that they could take back to their county boards and their constituents to say, my results from my audit matched what my machine said. So to do that, there's approximately 1,326 precincts. That means 130 precincts that are audited. That means all 93 each will get one. The larger counties are given more because they have more ballots to account for that. And then the last 20 or so is a random draw that, so some of the other 93 counties get, they always say, oh, I'm the unlucky one. I could have to do 2 precincts this election. But it's all a random draw done after the election and not told to the officials until the next day. And the second part about that we did is that I made sure this manual audit happened before certification to our office. Before it could be done after certification, and what I said was, it doesn't make a difference. If you find a problem after certification, it becomes a little bit harder. So let's do this before certification. So if there is an issue, you can go back and be able to fix that. And that 10% is what's going to be occurring for the presidential general election. And so when you're looking at the coding for, let's say, President of the United States, sheriff, and then a state issue such as U.S. Senate, or a local issue such as a county sheriff, that's the coding that goes to all the ballots in the county. So if you're finding a problem in one, if you're finding that there's an issue that ends up going back to coding, that's something that you can look back to all of the ballots. So it doesn't matter if you don't have to do all of the precincts in order to find an anomaly that makes you want to go back and figure it out. And to this point, we have never had a manual audit that has ever been off more than 1 or 2 ballots, which can be accounted for due to human error, or a ballot going through the machine twice by accident, or a mark that a person doing the hand count counted as a mark that the machine didn't because it was very light because the voter didn't follow instructions about the ballot fully darkening the oval. So the manual audit has been a very important piece of the puzzle to show that even though we've tested before the election, the counting machines did what they were supposed to on election day prior to certifying the ballot. The second part in regards to a forensic audit, we are aware of ESNS's willingness to do this. We are open to that. Prior had been anybody just wanted to come in and open up the doors, and it would void the warranty. And we do have in our contracts on the voter registration system and that independent third-party audits have to happen in regards to being able to try to penetrate into the system to see there are vulnerabilities. And our office has worked with outside third parties to run a pilot project to test the accuracy and the software within our machines. That information is currently being compiled in a report that we hope to be released before the election. We have done that, and I'm sure Chris didn't want to talk about that because it's my information to talk about, but we are doing that work because we do think it is important to make sure that we have that credibility that our machines are working in many different capacities outside of what we're already doing.
So it's an audit above and beyond the tabulating
Yes.
process? It's an audit to see whether they can be accessed?
It's an audit to make sure that the software that was certified is still the software that's being used in the machines to be able to count the ballots, that nothing's been modified.
So it's a test to see whether they tabulate correctly?
It's a test to make sure that how it's coded has not been changed, that in one aspect, yes, that it will tabulate correctly.
Is part of that testing going to determine whether or not it's accessible on the internet?
This particular test that we're doing, beyond what we already do, will not have that, but the mere fact that it is certified by the EAC won't allow for internet capability to occur, and ESNS has taken these machines to independent laboratories, such as the laboratory in Idaho, to be able to test to make sure that that is occurring. And we've seen, and we see those reports, and we know that our machines are not connected to the internet. But beyond, if there are things that we are open to doing those type of testing.
Okay. I had put in a request to Chairman Brewer to have a testifier testify who is a certified cybersecurity and information white hat hacker, if you will. He was on teams. He has led teams in vulnerability management, security tests, and evaluation, and system accreditation. Additionally, his name was Clay Parikh. I don't know if you're familiar
I'm not
with him.
familiar.
Okay. Additionally, Parikh has supported civil and Department of Defense agencies within the U.S. government, plus international customers such as NATO. Holds a Master's of Science in Cybersecurity, Computer Science from University of Alabama in Huntsville. He's also held the following certifications: Certified Ethical Hacker, CEH, and Certified Hacking Forensic Investigator, CHFI. This was invited testimony only for this interim study, and I was told that if he showed up, that the Secretary of State's office would not be represented at this hearing. Is that true?
I'm not familiar with what conversations occurred in regard to this hearing. I was just told that I was invited to be here.
So the Secretary of State's office would be okay with a forensic investigator investigating the vulnerability of being accessed by the internet. I don't think anyone has any concern that the tabulators tabulate accurately. Tabulation is not a particularly complicated mechanism to do. But I think most concerns center around whether or not there's accessibility on the internet somewhere in the process that would change the results, right? And nobody wants that to happen. So would the Secretary of State's office be okay with someone like this Clay Parikh?
Well, without knowing this person, their qualifications, this is a conversation that has to happen between the Secretary of State's office and ESNS to make sure that whoever's doing this has the qualifications and.
Well, I just
you know,
read his qualifications.
I understand, and all of that would need to be vetted before that to being allowed.
So the answer is you're not sure.
I'm saying is we would be open to testing. Who does that testing is up for proper vetting.
Okay, well then say there's 2 potential investigators. One authorized by you and one authorized by the committee. Would you be okay with it?
This committee looked at legislation last year, I believe, that would have the State Patrol hire an investigator that could do this type of work. That would be, I believe this, we were supportive if that was the way the legislature wanted to go, if that's the person within state government or this committee wanting to be able to do that work. But outside of that, it would have to be something that's vetted between the Secretary of State's office and the vendor to make sure that it is the right fit.
The right fit?
The right fit to be able to do this. As Mr. Washington mentioned, you just can't have someone coming off the street wanting access to MR machines. So that vetting is a very important process to make sure that it is a credible person doing this work. Because the last thing I want is someone going into our machines and planting something.
Okay, I understand that. So would the Secretary of State's office put down some criteria of credentials that would be okay for the Secretary of State to authorize an investigation?
I'm going to take that back to the Secretary and look at that.
Thank you very much.
Are there any other questions?
I have a question.
Senator Conrad.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Thank you, Mr. Bena, for being here. And you heard my exchange maybe earlier with Mr. Cruz. If you could just help us, and we can go through a lightning round since we've intruded upon everybody's lunch hour here, and we can follow up in greater detail if need be. But again, I just wanted to lift up some of the areas of concern that the committee's heard about in recent years and just get your assessment as to whether or not there's appropriate safeguards in place to address these issues or if there's legislation needed for additional reform. Are there safeguards in place in regards to voter registration to weed out those who are not eligible?
Yes.
Okay, great. Are there safeguards in place to ensure that people who are deceased are removed from the voter rolls?
Yes.
Are there procedures in place to ensure that if an individual attempts to vote twice, that would be caught and would not, in fact, be allowed to cast 2 ballots?
Yes.
Or multiple ballots, I guess. Are there mechanisms and safeguards in place to ensure that there's no voter impersonation kind of fraud from happening where I show up, even though I'm Danielle Conrad, I say I'm my mom, Stephanie Nankis, and that I want to cast her ballot?
With the new voter ID provisions, if you're trying to do that at the polling site, the poll worker will look at your name and your photo to make sure that it matches what's the name that's in the poll book to be able to do that on your.
Now, it would be weeded out very quickly. Sherry Schweitzer and her team in Seward would quickly identify that was not going to work out. I remember voting in our rural precinct, and we'd come in and they'd say, "Hey, Danielle, your mom's already been in, your dad hasn't been in," and so voter ID looks really different in a lot of our rural precincts. And then the last piece is, just to put a finer point on it, but there's significant criminal penalties in place under Nebraska law and federal law for voter fraud, for impersonation, for malfeasance related to ineligible people voting, for attempting to vote twice. Is that accurate from a general perspective?
Yes, and they've been put into use just as early as the 2022 election. Individuals were prosecuted for falsifying their voter registration, of living at an address that was not theirs in order to vote in an election they were not entitled to, and they were prosecuted.
In Nebraska?
Correct.
Okay. And I'm aware of one case where some new Americans had voted by mail and then also attempted to vote on election day, and that was also identified through current safeguards and dealt with in the criminal justice system.
Correct.
So I think it's fair to say, let me just get your assessment. And we've heard from some of the other people, and we've heard about this for the last couple of years. Are Nebraska elections safe and secure from your perspective?
Absolutely.
Okay. Are there additional legislative reforms that we need to undertake in the next legislative session to increase voter security?
Our office is always open to ways to make the process better, but it has to come from the standpoint that our elections are safe, accurate, and secure. Coming from any position other than that, then you need to bring evidence to the contrary of why that should be. And time and time again, that evidence has never been presented to our office to change that opinion.
Okay. I think that'll do it. Thank you, Mr. Bena. Thank you, Vice Chair.
All right. Additional
Or
questions?
Chair, sorry. I didn't realize she's like back there.
I know, it's a little
Senator Sanders.
Thank you, Chair. Deputy Bena, thank you for being here, and thank you for allowing those that have concerns of our safe, that our elections are safe. So thank you, and continue to keep them safe and reliable.
All right. Anything else? All right, Wayne, thank you for your time. Thanks for, oh, yes.
Yeah, I kind of paused because there was one thing I wanted to bring up.
Go for it.
I'm going to end with this. I've talked to you about how Nebraska has been the forefront of many different election security concerns and many different new ways of doing it that's been copied in many other states. But unfortunately, this week, Nebraska was on the forefront of something nationally that I wish I wouldn't have to. We were the first state that got their mail on Monday to find a envelope from a organization that was pretty notoriously named that we weren't going to open the envelope. We set that envelope aside. We contacted the State Patrol, who assessed that the hazmat team should be in. Lincoln Fire and Rescue came to take a look at it. They x-rayed it, no explosives, but a powdery substance was found inside. Everything was locked down. It was tested. It was a harmless substance, but meant to intimidate. While I couldn't see the letter because it was being used as evidence, I asked the question, was it a national letter or was it addressed to specifically our office? They said it was nationally oriented. I instantly got on the phone to our federal partners, FBI, Postal Inspector, and alerted the states as fast as we could that I think this is going national. And in fact, it did. That day, Wyoming, Iowa, Kansas, Mississippi, and Tennessee all received the same letter. And based upon that intelligence, evacuations were a little bit shorter. People knew what to test for and what to look for. But more importantly, that intelligence allowed that the mail over the next 2 to 3 days was able to be intercepted. People were ready for it, or what have you. I talked about that our elections are safe, accurate, and secure. And we are willing to work whatever we need to do to be able to enhance that process if we start from that level. For those that don't want to start at that level and don't provide the evidence, it's becoming dangerous. And now it is letters going to all 50 states with demands very similar to the demands that you've been hearing for the last 4 years, with white powdery substances that my frontline workers may or may have to open and be intimidated against. And this is very dangerous. And I don't think anybody in this room, whether or not you like the way our elections are run or don't like our way our elections are run, want any election official to have to go through that. And I don't want any election official to have to go through that. So if you want election reform, start from the aspect that we are the gold standard here in Nebraska, or provide me evidence otherwise. Outside of that, it is allowing the individuals to try to intimidate and do these things to try to take us off our game. We didn't evacuate. We kept doing our job. And we'll continue to do that work for all of our 93 counties and their constituents. What I just want to end by saying is that the more that we have unreasonable expectations or unreasonable requests, it leads to situations where 50 states get the same letter with a powdery substance, and this is not where we want our election administration to be. I'll leave it at that. Thank you for this hearing today.
All right. Thank you for your testimony, and thanks for sharing that.
Mr. Chairman.
Oh,
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I appreciate that. There are people out there that are deranged, that do these kind of things. But you made a comment that provide evidence to you that there's something wrong. The burden of proof is the other way around. The burden of proof should be on the Secretary of State's office to provide evidence to us that there's nothing wrong.
I appreciate that perspective, and I would say is that the data we've provided over the last 4 years and the methods that we've taken and listening to this committee on the certain pieces of data that they've wanted to see, we have done and complied with.
well, for 8 years, you've answered the call and provided whatever I've asked of you. So, Wayne, thank you for your service to Nebraska. Thanks for your testimony. With that, we will wrap up with Senator.
Thank you.
Right, I took my